Welcome to the Alex Merced cast, where Alex Merced of AlexMerced.com brings you principled, thoughtful, libertarian commentary on issues that matter.
Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMerced.com, and you're listening to the Alex Merced cast. And this week we got a special episode. Basically what happened is that recently I put out several posts. I put out one post where I asked people, what would you guys like me to talk on future episodes of the podcast? So expect over the next several weeks I'll be talking about things such as how to be kind. A lot of people wanted to know more about how to be as nice as people think I am or see me as. So I'm going to do an episode on that. Principles versus results. Basically, a pragmatic versus principle kind of discussion. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks. Someone asked me about English as an official language, abortion, libertarian pop culture, monopolies, compensation and its relation to effort, health insurance and health savings accounts, party discipline. So talking about kind of getting the libertarian party in line, wealth accumulation, welfare, liberty versus anarchy, and taxes on weed and whatnot. So a lot of those topics you'll be hearing over the next couple of weeks. But this week, this week's going to be a longer episode. This week, I'm going to be covering a lot of ground because what happened is that also in that I had another post where I just kind of posted a real sort of one-sentence bumper sticker of sort of what the Libertarian Party is about, with the final saying, any questions? Mainly kind of imagining the SNL character David S. Pumpkins, where he's like, any questions? And if you haven't seen David S. Pumpkins, go to YouTube, look up David S. Pumpkins and watch all the sketches. It's hilarious. But what happened is that this person has had some conversations with libertarians recently where the impression they were left on by talking to these libertarians is that they were callous, that they only cared about themselves, sort of the caricature that people hear of libertarians. And like most caricatures, it comes from a place where there's people who are that caricature. Not everyone, okay? That's the thing about like stereotypes. Not everyone is that stereotype, but unfortunately there's those people who perpetuate it. And there's definitely, I've met those people who leave the same impression with me with libertarians. And I'm a libertarian, and I'm like, wow, man, this person's mean. So I was like, I understand that. I'm sorry you got that impression, but you know what? They had a list of questions, and I'm gonna address them in this episode to the best of my ability. And again, my goal in this episode is not to change anyone's mind. Okay, the goal of any conversation should never be to change someone's mind, because no one changes somebody else's mind. What you do is you can help them understand something. You can help them see something from a different angle, but the mind changes slowly over time. You have different ways you look at the world. You accumulate different knowledge, different perspectives over time from learning from many different perspectives. And then you see the world and you start kind of seeing the ideas that you've learned in action, and you start changing from that. I just want people to kind of understand where I'm coming from as a libertarian more. One, so that way they realize that even if they disagree with me, I'm coming from an earnest place. I'm coming from a place where I do care. And two, then hopefully, they will one day maybe see eye to eye, but if not, at least if you understand me, we can get along, have a conversation, and figure out how to move forward based on both of our ideas, and that's not a bad thing. Cool. But before I get into answering all the specific questions that were online, I always like to just kind of go through that brief overview, sort of the way I look at sort of the political conversation from a philosophical level, because I think this is important. A lot of people think they're asking the same question and think they're making the same assumptions. And if you think everyone's asking the same question and making the same assumptions, then it's hard to understand where somebody else is coming from. Because you're like, well, based on the assumptions that I'm making and the questions that I think I'm answering, what they're saying is just completely wrong. It makes no sense. And that's where a lot of polarization comes from, because the questions we're asking and the assumptions we're making are becoming so vastly different, and we're so not clarifying them that we're just talking past each other. So when I look at the political landscape and the political conversation, it generally seems like there's really sort of three overarching, that everybody wants society. No one's saying, hey, you know what, I want society to fall apart and I just want chaos, okay? There is no one, even most anarchists don't want chaos, and they want society. Okay, society being sort of a large amount of individuals interacting in sort of this tapestry of institutions and commerce and whatnot. Everyone seems to want that. Okay, so but everyone has sort of a different concern over what's going to dismantle what's basically society's greatest threat. Okay, and it comes from where they think what society's greatest glue comes together. Okay, what keeps society together? And when I take a look at conservatives, to me it seems like what they feel keeps society together is order. Okay, the idea that there's rules and traditions, and that this creates sort of a unified, creates some sort of bond or thread that connects everyone. Okay, and then that basically, when those lines deteriorate, you get disorder, and disorder will lead to society falling apart. So this is why they want order as much as possible, and they want to enforce order they want rules to be well defined. They want those rules to be strictly enforced, and then they get a lot of anxiety when people want to change the rules or change the way things have worked, because whenever there is change, there is an element of disorder that comes in place, because people don't know what the new normal is for quite some time. And that's always one of the fundamental problems, people's time horizons. They want things to change like in a second. They want them to have an idea, pass a law, and then suddenly everything is better, which it never works that way. Oftentimes, real change takes generations. There are other things that I'll be trying to change now, I won't get to see the true fruits of that change. And I'm okay with that. Okay, I realize these things take time. So that's sort of the way I see it from the conservatives, based on sort of what I try to listen, I try to hear where people are coming from, and try to get to for where that root is. Okay, not sort of the specifics. Okay, I get the specifics, but all the specifics are sort of part of a overarching structure of thought. And on the left, it's equality. But I think what really most people aren't saying, hey, everyone should have the exact same income, the exact same amount of wealth, the exact same amount of healthcare. When they're saying equality, what they're really thinking is they're really more concerned about the disparity between the extremes. Okay, it's not that there should be one number, but to them, what happens is that society needs people to relate to each other. Okay, that's this. And if I'm a billionaire and you have $1, okay, it's going to be hard for us to kind of speak on the same level because our experiences are so different. Okay, and then on a society scale, when these disparities become really different, societies can almost go through mitosis, where they split into two, where you have kind of like people talk about two Americas or two New York Cities, red versus blue, or rich versus poor, or the healthy versus the unhealthy, or the smart versus the not smart. You get these stratifications that occur because of the extremes, and this creates disunity. Basically, people are less caring for the people in the opposite group. Okay, so poor people want to eat the rich, and rich may seem not too enthused by the poor. Okay, and that's sort of the impression when those disparities get really large. So they're scared about those disparities widening because they think that's going to create this disunity that's going to cause society to fall apart, and cause that disunity is going to cause people to try to subvert each other in a sense. Okay, so, and then from a libertarian standpoint, society stays together because we choose to be together. Okay, it's that element of choice. Okay, it's kind of like, why are you part of your family? I mean, you can always walk away from your family. Now, people are probably a lot less likely to walk away from family than walk away from a friendship, but there's still an element of consent. There's an element of you saying, hey, I'm going to be part of this. And things can get bad enough that you choose to walk away. Okay, oftentimes the relationships that fall apart are the relationships where someone's really, really controlling. So, in the sense that oftentimes, for society to be together, we want freedom, because basically, as long as we feel like this is something we chose to be part of, we'll stay part of it. And also, it means all of us will seek to kind of keep each other's consent to be part of it. Again, like a healthy relationship, either partner can easily just walk away from the relationship, but because we both want the relationship to keep going, we aim to make each other happy, provide value for each other. Okay, and society can be a lot like that. Basically, long as we feel that being part of this thing is something that I can just walk away from, okay? And the fact that I want others to also be part of this thing, I have an incentive to, one, try to keep others in, and other people have an incentive to try to keep me in, and we all benefit each other more. Okay, but if then once we feel like we're being too controlled, we have a tendency to rebel. Okay, when you see kids being overly rebellious from their parents, or any institution where there's too many rules, too much control, people rebel. Okay, so basically, when liberty deteriorates, it can cause a dismantling of society because then people rebel against that control. Okay, so so again, that's sort of the overarching sort of idea. Basically, everyone's kind of concerned that society will fall apart. Okay? If this thing goes too far. And at the end of the day, there's no one doesn't want these three things. Like if I talk to someone on the left, it's not like they don't want people to be free and they don't want order. If I talk to someone on the right, it's not like they want massive this inequality and they want no freedom. There are people sort of on the fringes who really just want to subjugate everybody to get that equality or get that order. Okay, they're very few though. Okay, sometimes there's some really loud voices in those fringe camps, but oftentimes the loudest people are the people who are part of the smallest groups. Okay, because oftentimes it's the most zealous who are the most vocal. Okay. And I've been there. I've gone through I've been a zealous progressive. I've been a zealous conservative, and I've been a zealous libertarian at times in my life. So I've been there. So that's just sort of the overarching framework that I see when I observe sort of political conversation. Now to kind of apply it more to sort of the U.S. context and sort of think about, libertarian. And again, there's a lot more to libertarians, and I know libertarians are thinking you didn't talk anything about violence and whatnot. Yes, libertarians believe in self-ownership, and because everyone owns themselves, we don't believe anyone has the right to use violence on each other or to compel each other, and that's we have that moral framework. But here I'm more focusing sort of in a societal conversation, and sort of our larger, grander view of sort of what's going on underneath this sort of societal political conversation. Okay, so the first question that I got was basically, how do you lower taxes and still fund infrastructure in schools? Okay, because basically libertarians are saying lower taxes. Okay, and then just kind of the why you want to lower taxes. It's not just want to lower taxes because you just want to keep your money. I mean, you have a right. It's your property. You should keep it. But it's not just that. There are practical reasons we want lower taxes. One, because taxes come out of your paycheck, okay? Your paycheck gets smaller, and that makes people struggle more. And then two, costs are fungible, okay? You can pass costs on in different ways. So if you're a business and you get taxed more, you could increase the cost of what you're selling. That's possible. You could decide to, lower your costs by lowering who you employ or investing in automation to replace the people you employ to lower your labor costs. You could maybe pay smaller dividends, which then encourages people to invest less in new enterprises, because basically less return, less people are going to do it. But there's some sort of costs, okay? If you raise costs, so now you're going to increase the cost of the stuff I buy while lowering my paycheck, that's going to put me in a position where I am more likely to need help more. And you create a situation where more people need help, which means there'll be a greater demand for aid, which means even more taxes need to be levied, which then creates a cycle where basically you create a program to help people, you fund it through taxes, but now because of the effect of the taxes, more people need help, but now you need more taxes to pay for all the new people who need help, and it creates this never-ending cycle. Also, there's sort of demographic changes, such as how long people live, that have an effect, especially with things like Social Security and Medicare, where people living longer creates it more expensive. And people living longer is a great trend. We want people to live longer. But we do it but the way it's currently structured creates a way where there's a huge cost to it. Okay? And that crowds out other expenses, other investments, and etc. Now, cool. So that's sort of the tax thing. We want to lower taxes because it does have a positive effect on society, and a lot more than just what I mentioned. There's a lot more to say about taxes, but again, I'm already 15 minutes into this episode, so I'm going to try to get straight to the point. But infrastructure, yes, funding infrastructure is important. There's different ways to fund infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily have to be taxes. Okay, and there's different models. I'm not going to say any of these are the right model, but a couple models that are out there that exist. We do have toll roads and whatnot that already exist. And again, if you got to keep more of your paycheck, you might be able to afford those rolls. But there are going to be people who make so little that they may still not be able to afford the tolls. So what about them? And I'm going to come back to that. Cool. So you could do tolls, but again, there's that regressive element to it in the sense, what about the poorest people who may still need to use that road? Then there's the model of, basically like Larry Sharp, my good friend Larry Sharp, who ran for governor last year. He ran on the idea of selling naming rights in the sense of trying to raise funds to help fund infrastructure, not by increasing taxes, not by instituting tolls, but by trying to use it as basically as marketing inventory, by basically letting people name roads, creating marketing spaces on the roads in order to basically raise funds. Okay, other people already own billboards and make money off of that. Why can't you use that to kind of help fund the roads and fund infrastructure building? Okay, so there's different ways you can think about it. There's also models that could be done with different elements of technology, sort of like, imagine like how Easy Pass works here in New York City. Basically, if you had some sort of GPS tracking that kind of kept track of how much you drove and then you paid by use. I've done some more work on this before, and that's assuming that we kept the roads as sort of public roads. You'd probably still have an exploration of these types of models with private roads, but that gets into a whole other element of discussion that is sort of beyond where that discussion really is at this point. Although if you do want to hear me talk about private roads, there are videos where I've discussed how that could work. Again, here's the thing at the end of the day. No one knows for sure what's the best way to do things. And that's a big reason why libertarians want decisions to be made at a local level. Because honestly, what's the best way to do something? One, we don't know in an absolute. You could do all the studies in the world, but until you do it, you don't know how well it's going to work, because it's not just the idea that makes a difference. It's how is it funded? Who are the people who are actually putting interaction? What is the governance? Making sure that they actually do it right. And also how people respond to it. There's all these factors that you can't model for. So when you do smaller experiments across the country and which for the most part, it is local governments who kind of figure out roads and things like that. So lower federal taxes wouldn't necessarily change the road picture. Now, if you're talking about like no taxes whatsoever, again, there's still alternative ways of funding it. But having sort of that stuff figured out on a local level allows people to make mistakes. But when you try different things, you also discover things that work better. And when things work better, people can copy what works better and avoid what somebody else did that failed, and you do it on a smaller scale. When you do something federally, if you do it wrong, everybody suffers and everybody pays a price. And more than likely, usually a federal program is much harder to go back on. So once you put it into place and you've already made the mistake, you're stuck with the mistake, because it took so much political will and so many elections and so much advocacy just to get that thing into place. So then generally what happens is that everyone just keeps trying to put a Band-Aid on a mistake because they can't get rid of the mistake. And this is where a lot of policy discussions goes on. We're just debating over which Band-Aid to put on next versus saying, hey, you know what? This maybe wasn't the best idea. Let's try something else. Okay, which is, again, a reason why libertarians want a lot of these decisions to be made more locally, because it's, one, you can learn from a smaller scale, and also if you make a mistake, you can much more easily undo a mistake at a local level, whether it's at the state or local town, or even a private enterprise trying it. Okay, private enterprises can try, and I have done a lot of videos on examples of this that would take me hours to go through now. Same thing for schools. Okay, schools, again, the idea is that we always assume that everything has to work within the same model. Now, I wouldn't say I'm the biggest expert on sort of all the school choice literature, but I mean, there's a lot of interesting models. Like if you take a look at the Thaley schools in Virginia, these are schools that actually pay less, that provide kids with a quality education at a cost per student less than your typical public school. Okay, at a price point much cheaper than your typical private school, making, at least a alternative. An educational alternative available, not just to rich families, but lower middle class families, and even even some poor families, depending on, because there's aid programs and stuff like that. And that's just one model. When you take a look at things like Khan Academy, which a lot of parents already use to kind of supplement their kids' educations, because of a lot of the dynamics that have led to poor outcomes in our current public education system. But people always get concerned, like, okay, well, if you got rid of public schools, would that mean there's no school? There's interim, there are compromises that you can make as far as moving things in the right direction. Like one of the things that I advocated for in the past, and again, I'm a libertarian who spent a lot of time thinking about this over the last 10 years. And in my heart of hearts, I do believe that you can move to a world where these things are sort of completely societal run, in a sense. They're done through either businesses or not charities, or through community organizations. It's a mix of all these things, and that would happen because people don't just sit around and be like, oh, there's no schools, too bad. They'll create alternatives. But I do think not everybody has the certainty that I have to make that leap. So trying to discuss ideas that kind of address some of those concerns I don't think is a fruitless venture. So like one thought was always sort of the idea of sort of block granting students, in the sense of saying, okay, right now, let's say we spend $10,000 per student, for all the public schools. Okay. What we'll do is we'll just say 10,000. So if we spend, let's say 10,000, whatever I said, we're going to lower that. We'll say 7,000 per student. Okay. And now basically they can spend this wherever they want, but that's what they get from the government. So basically, if you're that poor person who couldn't afford a private school, you're still going to get this $7,000 to get your kid in some school. And here's the thing. Entrepreneurs are going to be like, that's $7,000. So I need to create a educational program geared to that price point. And people will do that. People will sit there and say, and create models based on a $7,000 price point for that kid to be able to go to get an education. Okay. And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to do that. And the competition is going to push quality because, hey, even if I come out with some sort of really crappy school for $7,000, that leaves room for somebody else to do something better for the same price point, because $7,000 is the grant, is that block that the kid's going to get no matter what. So if somebody else can give you more for $7,000, you're going to go to them. So it allows people to sort of compete over who can do the best for that price point. Okay? And that will allow that private system to develop, in which over time, as education outcomes improve and as economic outcomes improve from that, you could probably even step that forward, where basically you wouldn't necessarily need that grant anymore. Although, again, the libertarian concern always is once you have something like that in place, it's always hard to walk backwards, because people get very scared when you take something that they have. People fear loss more than they value gain. If you read like behavioral studies and all that stuff. Okay, so that addresses sort of the first issue. And we're 23 minutes in, so I'm going to try to be a little faster in the next couple. I kind of talked a little bit about social programs, in the sense that libertarians aren't against the idea of aid, okay? Or a social safety net. You do need things to help you when things happen unexpected. Now, for most people, that would be insurance, okay? Now, granted, insurance markets right now are horrible, but a lot of the problems you have with insurance companies nowadays is that you have a lack of competition, because regulation has pretty much prevented a lot of elements of competition that would hold insurance companies accountable to honoring contracts and a lot of different things. Okay, so you have very large insurance companies that have a large amount of power in the space, but again, it's because they were able to capture so much market share, because things like regulations made it hard for somebody to start a new insurance company. And that's the thing about regulations, is that you may be putting in rules that you think, okay, well, this company's going to be a much better actor now because this rule's in place. But you've made it more expensive for somebody else to jump in, because they're going to have a much higher upfront cost than all the people previous had to start. So they're never going to be able to get to that level to compete, or they might not even bother entering the market. So then those insurance companies that are able to deal with those additional costs of insurance are able to capture much more market share, which leads them to have more political power, which leads them to have more economic power, which creates disparities in society. Okay, so this is a reason to be concerned about regulation. Also allows them to cheat more, because as rules get complicated, people don't understand the rules, so it's much easier to get around them, versus having sort of a few simple rules, kind of like I always use the comparison of the game Uno. The game Uno is very simple, so it's very easy to enforce the rules. You don't even need someone to keep track, because you can tell someone's cheating right away, because, a green 2 shouldn't be going on a red 4. So simple rules are easy to enforce, they're transparent, while really complicated rules become really obtuse and easy to get around. Think of playing a game like Dungeons & Dragons, which is so complicated, no one's really sure what the rules are. Okay. But back to insurance companies. So insurance companies being sort of, because that's what they literally are. Insurance companies are literally a safety net. Like literally all social welfare programs are modeled after an insurance company, basically in the sense that you pay into something that is then provided to you when a adverse event happens. Okay? The difference is when you have a really robust competitive insurance market, you get a couple different things. Insurance companies have to price risk. That's their main job. They got to figure out, okay, well, you're going to take this risk. How much do you need to pay for us to really insure that risk without us going out of business? Because we need to make sure that we're able to honor all our other contracts and still, turn a profit. Okay, and there's a lot of insurance companies that are mutually owned, so that means their profits go back to their policyholders, so that's another model. So in that case, what happens, insurance companies invest a lot of money in researching risk. And the great thing about this is they price risk. So for example, car insurance, if you buy a car that's more likely to get stolen, you're going to be paying more car insurance. Okay, and that incentivizes you to maybe buy a car that's less likely to get stolen. It actually influences your decision making to do things that are less risky, which means the chances of these adverse events happening become less. And that's a good thing. Okay, so you want insurance company pricing risk. Imagine this in unemployment, where if people bought their own unemployment policies. Okay, because not everybody needs 6 months, 26 weeks. Some people might need years. Okay, some jobs are really hard to replace. Some people might need only a couple months because their job isn't something that's really hard to find again. Okay, and they might rather pay less. Okay, also, if you're someone who gets laid off, goes into a lot of places and gets laid off a lot, or you're a company that has really high turnover, people are going to end up having to pay a premium for their unemployment policy to go work at your place. So that creates and that means you're going to have to pay them more to be willing to work at your place, which means you're going to have an incentive to have a better work atmosphere. Prices create incentives, but right now a lot of those incentives don't exist. And when those incentives don't exist, society does different things. Okay, so we've taken a lot of the price signals that would normally exist otherwise out of the market. Okay, cool. And same thing with like deposit insurance. If you went to a bank that was taking a lot of risk and doing a lot of risky stuff with the money, you would probably pay more for deposit insurance, which means that would disincentivize from you to going to banks that are taking on too much risk with your money. You don't need to necessarily understand the risk they're taking. The insurance policy would be priced and kind of signal it to you. That's a great thing about price signal schools. You don't need to know everything. The price kind of tells you what you need to know. And vice versa. I mean, this is sort of one of the main reasons why like Ludwig von Mises and F.A. Hayek sort of won the debate against socialism, because of the whole socialist calculation. Because if you imagine a socialist world where everything's just kind of divvied up and there's no exchange, there's no prices. So none of those signals exist for society to sort of coordinate itself and know what they should or shouldn't be doing, that it eventually falls apart. Okay, so that was very good literature. So if you haven't read a lot of Mises and Hayek's writings on sort of the problems with socialism, people always talk about the incentive part, which is true, but more so the calculation debate means even if you could solve the incentive problem, meaning get people to be willing to work hard regardless of their compensation, it would still fall apart because the signals aren't there to know how many of this to make and how many of that to make. Because again, resources get used for are used for multiple things, and there's trade-offs. And there's hard ways. It's impossible to measure what the best trade-offs are without prices. Cool. Okay. But it's not just insurance companies can be part of that sort of social safety net. It would also but that would be a large part of it. For people who can't afford it, private insurance would be a lot of it. It is now. Okay? And insurance companies create a lot of rules on their policyholders now to keep them from doing things. Like if you own a policy on your house, you have to replace your roof every once in a while, because the insurance policy wants you to take steps to take care of yourself. So they do create rules. It's the same thing that happens now, except you have a competitive. Ideally, you'd have a more competitive market than we have now. And again, that's because it's the costs of starting up an insurance company are so ridiculous, because a lot of the regulatory burdens that exist. Okay, and it's not that there wouldn't be regulation. Okay, if government didn't do regulation, there'd still be regulation, and there already is lots of levels of regulation that exist outside of government. Rules are just a natural part of how things evolve. They just would come from different institutions, and there'd be more market forces determining what those rules are, because bad rules could be changed quicker and good rules could proliferate quicker. Okay, and I'm trying to keep this under an hour because there's a lot I want to address here, but again, I can only go so deep within that time in so many areas. But also, in addition to insurance, you would have sort of community programs, you would have charities, you'd have businesses. There are businesses that address a lot of these things. Like, for example, when it came to education, where a lot of people can't afford a college education nowadays, a company by the name of Praxis did something very amazing. What they did is say, you know what? This model doesn't work. It's gotten too expensive. It's broken. So let's create a new model. For a fraction of the cost and for a fraction of the amount of time it would take for you to go get a college degree, what Praxis does is matches you up with a company in the field that you would like to learn to be a career in. And basically, you pay a fraction of the money, and then what they do is they train you, and then you work at that company. So you're getting experience as you go along, learning the skills to do the job that you've been wanting to do. And when the whole process is over, you have a job. You have a job at that company. But on top of it, you've been educated. On top of that, you have experience. And on top of it, you have a job for a fraction of the price. And Praxis has been growing like gangbusters over the years because it's offered a really useful model for education. Okay, where you're learning hard skills, you're interacting with people, you're living a life, but it's just more efficient. And that's what happens. Entrepreneurs innovate, okay, and they just need to have the freedom to innovate. Some people are going to get it wrong. A lot of entrepreneurs are going to get it wrong. But the idea is that if you don't let the people who are going to get it wrong, the people who get it right in a big way don't, or you'll never get to them. Okay, oftentimes we say, hey, we found one solution that kind of theoretically works. Let's just impose it on everybody at the federal level. That's dangerous thinking, no matter whose idea that is, libertarian, progressive, or conservative. Okay, cool. Next is the death tax. Again, as a libertarian, we're against all taxes. In the sense that to the extent that you can eliminate or reduce a tax, you should. Okay, because what generally happens is that government ends up spending the money, and oftentimes they spend it not in the most efficient way. It ends up being used to give favors to your political. Because at the end of the day, these politicians aren't generally good people. Most politicians who are elected, they owe a lot of people a lot of favors, and not just because people who give them donations, but people who use their influence to vouch for them. There's a lot of ways that you become captured. It's not just by money. People always focus on money, which is one of the other issues I'm going to get to, but they get captured in all sorts of ways because it takes a lot to create a figure like that has that kind of influence. Other people have to vouch for you, within their communities, for you to win over a state, and they expect that you're not going to cross them at that point. So these politicians, they owe lots of favors to lots of people, and then that money ends up getting steered in all these different directions, regardless of what party they're in. Okay. Now, but the thing is that generally the argument for the death tax is that people are concerned about these massive multi-generational transfers of wealth. Like a billionaire leaves all his stuff to his kids. And here's the thing. Here's the practical reality of the death tax. It's a really easy tax to get around. Okay, you just basically put your money in an irrevocable trust, and you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so on a practical level, it's the people with the most money, people most want to hit with this tax, are not going to get hit with this tax. They can easily structure their wealth in a way that, or move their wealth to other places where basically it's just impossible to enforce. Okay, and even to another extreme, I mean, they could just put all their money in Bitcoin and hide it or something. Okay, if people want to avoid that tax, they definitely can. What happens though is a lot of these taxes end up hitting the people who just don't understand the tax rules because their wealth level isn't at a high enough level to be having their door knocked by an estate lawyer. Okay, so an estate lawyer isn't knocking on your door because your assets aren't things that are obviously worth a lot of money. And again, this doesn't happen that much. Like, you always hear the story about the farmer. I think Ted Cruz used this in 2016. Like, the farmer, he dies, his farm is valued at a price higher than the death tax exclusion. So they have this huge tax bill, but they don't have cash necessarily to pay it. Because again, the death tax is not a tax on the cash that you have, it's a tax on the value of your worth. And that's not cash. So if you owe $1 million in taxes, based on that, you have to come up with $1 million in taxes. So then you end up selling your farm. It gets sold to some corporate farm, and now that corporate farm has more market power, more political power out of it. And that's kind of what happens. It doesn't happen very often because there's just isn't that many people who are in that space, especially now that they've raised the death tax exclusion. But it is something that happens, and a lot less so than billionaires who actually get hit with it. Okay, so from a practical sense, it's just the impractical tax that generally hits the wrong people and is completely missed by the right people. And to change the rules to hit the right people, you're going to end up hitting a lot of people you don't want to hit, and also creating some real legal problems for people who have legitimate uses for some of those legal avenues. Okay, so that'll get us to the last thing I want to talk about, which is campaign finance. I'm one of those people who I don't buy into the idea that if you really, really regulate how money goes into politics, that you'll fix politics. Because, again, you don't just buy people with money, and it's not just through political contributions that you buy them. Okay, there's a bajillion ways, and the more. Well, here's essentially what happens. Okay, so right now you do have a really bad system because basically you have a system of contributing that lacks transparency, but transparency is more of an issue. It's people are unaware of where the money's coming from. But here's the thing: the people who can most easily raise funds are incumbents, people who are already in political power, because they have the most leverage over people with money. Okay, oftentimes both parties, what they do, this is something you'll notice. One of the best for this is on the Democrat side is Chuck Schumer. Watch when he proposes a bill. Okay, generally what happens is that if a particular industry or a particular company that's really big isn't making a contribution to the party's sort of PACs, what they'll do is they'll propose legislation and say, oh, this company is basically sacrificing the consumer, and they'll just do this massive PR against that company, put this legislation. It's never going to pass. The purpose was never to pass, but to scare that company into making a donation to their party. But here's then what happens in turn is that once that company starts making donations to the party, they're like, well, if I'm going to make these donations, I might as well get something out of it. And it creates sort of this dynamic where you have this sort of relationship where it's like, well, now I got your ear, so let's use it. And there's this bill and that is going to pass. That's kind of a problem. Can you change it for me? Blah 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 blah. And you end up having, you end up corrupting sort of enterprise, and you end up corrupting politics. It's like the worst is when they just get mixed together. Okay, and the way you avoid that is if government just had less power, if government just wasn't involved in as many aspects of your life, the financial incentive for businesses to invest in politics is less, so there would be no need for them to do so. Okay, that's generally the argument for less power. Although, again, the problem is government tends to give itself more power over time. Okay, it wasn't like the government just started with the level of power that it has now. It gave itself more and more over time. So that's generally where I even get critical of people who are sort of limited government people, because it's impossible to limit government as well. Okay, but I'm not going to spell out exactly sort of my core perspective on this. Okay, so that's the thing there. But then what happens now? So incumbents can always get the money. So the person who really needs like a big sort of sugar daddy donor are oftentimes the non-incumbents. Okay, and I don't mean just like non-incumbents in the sense that the other party who's not in power. Because generally, if you're the party, if you're the opposition party, if you're like the second party, you can still raise a lot of money from your core ring of donors that you're all your elected officials can extort from. It's the candidate who doesn't have that relationship with a party. It's those independent candidates, because they have no reason why does anyone want to give them money? Okay, they're not likely to win, and they have no influence over anything. So there's no pressure to give money. Okay, so the incumbent can always raise money. So what's happened with a lot of these, and there's actually statistics on this. There's stats that show this. That as you've increased sort of campaign finance rules, you've had less independence, less people sort of outside the political mainstream, basically be able to get into office, be able to be part of the system. Because basically the only people who have access to the donors are people who have either a relationship with the party or are an incumbent. So, but it's not just contributions that matter. It's all the rules for the entire election system. Ballot access. Okay, as a third party person, again, as the vice chair of the Libertarian Party, one of our big issues is just getting on the ballot. We end up spending a lot of our money getting on the ballot. So we are not. And the thing is that a lot of times, most states make it where if you're not a major party person, you get on the ballot, but you don't get on the ballot till like the last minute. So you don't even have a chance to campaign. The media won't talk to you till you're on the ballot. So you become insignificant. They shut you out structurally. So they make it where the only way for you to be part of the conversation is through the main parties. And the only people who will donate, the only candidates who get donations in the party are the people who have a good, cozy relationship with the party, not the people who are sort of acting as more independently within the party. Occasionally you get, your firebrands, you get your Ron Pauls, you get your Bernie Sanders, who kind of bypass that. Occasionally and rarely. But oftentimes for someone to really kind of break through, someone with significant funds has to be willing to take that risk. Okay, so when you limit that, you do limit, the independent voice, or sometimes people who self-fund themselves, like a Howard Schultz. Okay, regardless how people feel about Howard Schultz, he's able to do so because he's wealthy. But he can't necessarily fund someone else because there's limits on contributions. I mean, there's super PACs, but super PACs aren't candidate funds. The candidates can't steer those funds, even though there's some gray area on that and whatnot. Okay, but let's say you did put a hard cap on what people could contribute. Okay, and who could contribute? So let's say no corporate money, no corporations can make contributions, only individuals. Okay, that's fine. Okay, you've just limited the contributions to a political election committee. But then basically people would just do for-profit, instead of basically people would just start for-profit corporations. For-profit corporations can they can act. And if you sit there and start saying, okay, well, they can't do a political ad as a for-profit company or express themselves. So like then you start getting really into some really shady stuff. Because again, so you're saying, okay, you are starting to limit how people can talk and when, but at the end of the day, you'll still have the same corruption go on. Despite that, you're controlling people more and more, but you're not changing anything. Because that politician who does win, there's so many different levers to get influence on them. They're still going to need people to vouch for them. They're going to still owe those people favors. You can give people all sorts of favors by, giving their cousin a job and saying, hey, you know what, return the favor. Okay, and again, theoretically, there's so many different ways to just do it under the table. And now a lot of that bribery, a lot of that corruption becomes not transparent because they're doing it under the table, whether through cash transactions, briefcases of cash or cryptocurrency, that you don't even know that the contribution was made to buy off their opinion. So there's no way for you to know. I'd rather that they give a bunch of money to their political election committee, and now I know who gave the money, and the candidate steers it, and I can see how the candidate spends it. But now they go to these super PACs that are sort of distinguished from the candidate. The super PAC spends it on oftentimes very negative ads, just polarizing everybody even more. But the candidate is distanced from it because it's not his political election committee and he has no responsibility in steering those funds. So the candidates have less control over the message. It's just a horrible system the way we're doing it now. You can't regulate it enough to get rid of the problem, but you can regulate it enough to make the problem worse. And that's kind of where we're at right now, at least in my point of view. So those are my thoughts as a libertarian. I have thoughts on all sorts of things, and if you go on YouTube and you look up Alex Merced for Senate 2016, I had a lot of cool policy proposals that I did propose back in 2016 that I thought would appeal to conservatives, progressives, and libertarians. Not necessarily, pure ideal libertarian solution, but practical ideas that might move things in the right direction, whether there were tax reforms to make it easier for people to, build up wealth for a rainy day, and other things. So I'll leave you, if you guys want, search that on YouTube. You guys can always kind of find everything that I do and everywhere that I do it over there at alexmerced.com. Thank you guys for listening to this longer episode of the Alex Merced Cast. You guys have a great day and enjoy. And then again, for those who really enjoyed this episode and would like to become a supporter, do check out donate.alexmerced.com. And so that way I can continue doing what I am doing. And I appreciate all the support, all the kind words that you guys have had over the years. And thank you very much. But again, always remember, when you talk to somebody, don't talk with the point of changing their mind. Talk with an attempt to find understanding. Okay, if you listen to this and you're not a libertarian, you probably don't agree with everything I said. You probably have counter arguments to things that I've said today, because I can think of the responses that I'm going to get to some of the stuff that I said. I just didn't have the time necessarily to go down each individual rabbit hole right now. But I'm available to do so. I'm glad to do so, and in the future episodes I'll try to do more of that. But hopefully this helps you at least understand where I'm coming from more, and this will help you understand where at least fundamentally other libertarians are coming from. Not every libertarian has thought through these issues as much as I expressed in this episode, but neither has every progressive or every conservative. A lot of times, the majority of the people who believe in something believe in it viscerally. Okay? But then there are those who thought it through. I do make an effort to think it through and try to express it in a way that people can appreciate, understand, and ponder on, because that's only till we live in a world where we try to attempt to understand each other more and reach out to each other more, or we're going to start seeing actual changes happen in whatever direction, because it does take everybody to do it. It's not, libertarianism is about everyone for themselves, but is that we need everyone on board, but we want you to choose to be part of this. We want you to choose to be part of the change. And if, because forcing change oftentimes is like, again, think of like trying to put in an organ. Someone needs an organ transplant, but you put in an organ that doesn't match, so the body rejects the organ. Your intention was to just fix the problem by just getting it done, but it didn't fix the problem in the long run. You got to make sure you find the right organ that the body consents to have, so that way it can stick and be a sustainable solution. And that's where we're coming from in a lot of places, fundamentally. So you guys have a great day. Enjoy. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to the Alex Merced Cast. Learn more at alexmerced.com.